It's the astonishing biography of Camilla that has gripped the nation. Yesterday we told how Diana's death sparked a fallout between Charles and his mother. You can listen to that episode on our playlist. Today, royal author Penny Junor reveals how Camilla was accepted by the Queen, overcame appalling pre-wedding nerves and learned to excel in her public role. Early in the morning of her cold and blustery wedding day, Camilla was hiding under her covers, and no one could coax her to get up. For the whole week leading up to her marriage to the Prince of Wales on April 8, 2005, she'd been at Ray Mill, her home in Wiltshire, suffering from sinusitis. Fearful that Camilla wasn't going to make her own wedding, her friend Lucia Santa Cruz, who is from Chile, and the person who had first introduced Camilla to Charles 34 years earlier, had arrived bearing homemade chicken soup. In Chile, everything is cured by chicken soup, said Lucia. And she sat there and made her friend eat. Lucia had found her really ill, stressed. And on the wedding day itself, by which time Camilla had moved to Charles's residence, Clarence House, she literally couldn't get out of bed. She still wasn't feeling well, but now it was nerves more than sinusitis that kept her under the duvet. No one, least of all Camilla, knew what the reaction of the crowd at Windsor would be, what the media would say, or how the whole thing would go. Having once been widely reviled as an adulteress, she was almost paralyzed with fear. Camilla's sister Annabelle and daughter Laura were there with her in her bedroom, along with her dresser, Jackie Meakin, and a housemaid called Joy. But not one of them could persuade her to get up. Finally, her sister said, "Okay, that's all right. I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to get into your clothes." Only at that point did the bride-to-be get up. The gradual emergence of Camilla as an important part of the prince's life had begun in July 1996, almost a year before Diana's death, when Charles hired Mark Bolland, then the director of the Press Complaints Commission, as his deputy private secretary. His task was to rescue the prince's reputation and make his lover acceptable to the British public. And he went about it with gusto, by whatever means it took. As Charles knew only too well, the Queen was keen for her son's lover to leave his life. But he was not prepared to let Camilla go. Both of them were now divorced, and Camilla was getting fed up with being marginalized. So Bolland boldly told Charles he should invite Camilla to a weekend party at Sandringham, the Queen's home in Norfolk. "It will be a 2-day wonder in the press, and then it will go away. It won't be a problem," he said. Next, he bypassed the Queen's private secretary Robert Fellows, who reinforced the Queen's view about Camilla, and rang his deputy, Robin Janvrin, instead. Explaining the plan, Bolland told him that a story would be leaked to the press, posing the question, has the Queen given her permission for Camilla to be invited? So, on Janvrin's advice, the Queen's official reaction was that it was a private party. It was up to Charles to invite whomsoever he wished, and she would not have expected to be consulted. Thus Camilla got to attend her first private weekend party at Sandringham as a divorcee. The following year, Diana's tragic death made it impossible for the couple publicly to be seen together. It wasn't until 2 years later that Bolland engineered for them to be photographed coming out of a party at the Ritz Hotel in London. Many people in the prince's office thought it was too early for them to be seen together. As one of them says, "But that was Mark, he was always pushing things on because he wanted to get there, he wanted to achieve the goal of getting them married." The sky didn't fall in. And, thanks to Bolland's gambit, public opinion started turning round. Next, Camilla started turning up unannounced at public engagements, dinners, and events where the media was present. It was quite hard on her, people pointing and whispering, but she coped really well, says one person close to her. "What I noticed quite early on was the effect she had on the room." It amused the prince's team that, in the early days, Camilla would open her diary and say she wasn't sure she could fit more in. It had things in it like getting her hair done one day, or seeing an exhibition with a friend on another. "I thought, you're hardly doing anything," says one. It was a bit like that at the beginning, she just wasn't used to working. But the prince's staff were warming to her. They couldn't help liking that fact that she was so normal and down to earth. Camilla and the Queen finally met in the summer of 2000, when Charles threw a 60th birthday party at Highgrove for his cousin, the exiled King Constantine of Greece. It was the first time the two women had met in more than a decade. They shook hands, smiled at one another, Camilla curtsied, and they had a moment or two of small talk before going to different tables for lunch. But it seemed a highly significant step forward. Or was it? At the beginning of 2002, Stephen Lamport announced his intention to leave his post as the prince's private secretary in the summer. Bolland imagined he would get the job, but a deal had been done behind his back. The Queen was parachuting in her own man to sort out St. James's Palace, to get adultery off the front pages and make sure the prince's charitable work and more positive stories about the monarchy appeared there instead, and to get rid of Mark Bolland. That man was Sir Michael Peat, the inscrutable accountant who as keeper of the Privy Purse had revolutionized the royal finances. Bolland duly resigned. The person most sorry to see him go was Camilla, and with good reason, as Peat had arrived from Buckingham Palace with a clear agenda. His instructions were to sever Charles's relationship with Mrs. Parker Bowles because it was a mess and was detracting from his work. Camilla had been the prince's mistress, he'd admitted having an adulterous affair with her, and now she was sharing his bed, his house, and his life. And she was being seen in public by his side, but not as his wife. For a man who would one day be defender of the faith and head of the Church of England, this was an awkward situation at best. She had to go. But it didn't take Peat long to realize that this was an impossible dream. The prince would never give up Camilla, no matter what, and so Peat rapidly changed tack and, with the zeal of the freshly converted, became the loudest, fiercest advocate for their marriage. While Mark Bolland had laid the ground for it, Michael Peat was the man who made it happen. But there were obstacles to overcome first. It needed not just the Queen's permission but the agreement of the state, the Church, and the great British public. And, in his usual way, the Prince of Wales was dithering. He really is the most curious character. On the one hand he had stood his ground against his parents, the media, and the voice of the nation in making Camilla non-negotiable. A man who for decades had dedicated himself to duty, to doing the right thing, suddenly put everything he stood for and had worked for in jeopardy because of Camilla. He'd been through a lot of bad times with the public, says one of the team. And I think he was probably nervous about putting himself back in a negative situation, damaging the monarchy, and he didn't know whether he could persuade the Queen to accept her. The prince is too diffident and nervous and I think he was scared. Peat was having none of that. He went to the prince and told him very clearly that either Mrs. Parker Bowles had to go, or he had to marry her. They could not, under any circumstances, continue as they were. Another person who was key in persuading Charles to do the right thing was Camilla's father, Bruce Shand, then aged 87. Although he loved the prince dearly, he thought him weak, and was worried about how vulnerable he'd left Camilla by allowing her to live in limbo. Taking Charles aside, Bruce told him, "I want to meet my maker knowing my daughter's all right." Charles adored Bruce. He loved the whole extended Shand family and in turn they were very fond of him, but Bruce spoke for them all. They felt that Camilla's situation was precarious and a bit shoddy, and although she had never wanted marriage in the past, things were different now. She felt herself to be neither one thing nor the other and was secretly grateful to her father for putting pressure on Charles. Having been at Buckingham Palace for nearly 15 years, where he had been close to the Queen, Michael Peat was the perfect person to pull all the essential strands together and iron out the complications. He knew Robin Janvrin, who had been promoted and was now the Queen's private secretary, well, and Janvrin, being sympathetic to the prince, was willing to offer helpful advice to the Queen. Charles finally asked Camilla to marry him at Birkhall, the Queen Mother's house on the Balmoral estate, over New Year. He had spoken to his mother, his sons, and the rest of the family when they were all together at Sandringham for Christmas, which Camilla had spent with her family. News of the engagement leaked out on the morning of February 10, 2005, a day that the couple were due to attend a charity ball at Windsor Castle. The prince's staff sprang into action. The ring, 100,000 pounds worth of platinum and diamonds, had been a gift from the queen. It was a 30s Art Deco design, a central square-cut diamond with 3 smaller ones on either side, which had belonged to the Queen Mother and was one of her favorites. When asked how she felt, Camilla said she was just coming down to earth, but she coyly dodged the question of whether the prince had been down on one knee. The Prime Minister sent congratulations on behalf of the government. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were very happy and had given the couple their warmest wishes. And William and Harry? They were 100% behind the couple. They were very happy for our father and Camilla, and we wish them all the luck in the world. After Camilla had recovered from her early morning terror, the wedding day itself went smoothly, a civil ceremony at the Guildhall, followed by a church blessing at St. George's Chapel and a reception at Windsor Castle. There were a few boos when the royal car drove up, but the vast majority of spectators seemed delighted that Charles was finally marrying the woman he'd loved for more than 30 years. Tom Parker Bowles and Prince William acted as the couple's witnesses. Andrew Parker Bowles didn't come to the civil ceremony, although he did come to the blessing, but he'd already rung to wish his ex-wife luck. After the civil ceremony, the new Duchess of Cornwall and her husband went on to the castle for a blessing in the chapel. Her assistant Amanda McManus, who was waiting for them with other staff, recalls, as they came up the stairs, they were both crying. And that set all of us off, so we were all sobbing. It was just so touching. Slowly, as the day wore on, Camilla relaxed, reassured and supported by having her family around her. Her father, now 88 and ailing, had put off going to the doctor until after the wedding. When he finally did so, 4 days later, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he died 14 months later. But he'd seen his daughter getting married, and that mattered a great deal to him. The reception was in the state apartments. Charles gave a touching speech in which he thanked my dear mama for footing the bill and my darling Camilla, who has stood with me through thick and thin and whose precious optimism and humor have seen me through. But it was his mama's speech that was so perfect and laid to rest any lingering notion that she might still disapprove. The Queen is passionate about horse racing, and the date coincided with the Grand National, in which she had a horse running. She began by saying she had 2 important announcements to make. The first was that Hedge Hunter had won the race at Aintree, the second was that, at Windsor, she was delighted to be welcoming her son and his bride to the winner's enclosure. They have overcome Beecher's Brook and the chair and all kinds of other terrible obstacles. They have come through, and I'm very proud and wish them well. My son is home and dry with the woman he loves. For the prince, that day brought an end to his loneliness. Camilla already shared his private life but not all of his public life, and it was on the long, grueling foreign tours that he missed her the most. She was embarking on this at the age of 57, having previously done nothing much more taxing than weed a flower bed. But on that joyous day in Windsor, she was just happy to have got through it without anyone throwing an egg at her. As one guest put it, what people saw was 2 people in their 50s getting married, and why not? It's a love story. The late Sir James Goldsmith famously said, when a man marries his mistress, he creates a vacancy. That won't happen on Camilla's watch. She sees off anyone who shows the slightest designs on her husband. Knowing that Charles is very susceptible to flattery, she's wary of those who toady to him, who flatter him and laugh before he's even made a joke. He's a very bad judge of character, says a person close to her. If someone's nice to him, he thinks they're wonderful, while she's very sharp on people. There's also a sense of slight unease when it's women who are prettier and cleverer and talking the same language as him, which she doesn't do. She can be quite dismissive of them, and she's quite right. Charles is obsessive about order and tidiness. Camilla has always been untidy. Her homes have always felt lived in, full of clutter, dogs, and stuff that children have dumped. His are like country house hotels with not a photograph or a magazine out of place. He has never had to pick up so much as a dirty sock for himself. She has been chief cook and bottle washer for a family of 4. He has always had household staff to look after his every need, she has had no more than a cleaning lady to help. He has always had a punishing work ethic, she was new to the concept and found it hard to keep up. He likes people around him all the time and is a wonderful host, she needs a break from people and enjoys her own company, and will often announce she's off to bed. He never eats lunch, she needs to keep her blood sugar levels up. He can be very down in the dumps, she is almost always buoyant. He has a terrible temper and can be moody and difficult, she can get angry but she is generally very easygoing and cheerful. She has health issues that are almost certainly a legacy of that time. And even today she's living on her nerves, particularly with the 20th anniversary of Diana's death looming on August 31st, a date that has also sent a faint chill running through the corridors of Clarence House. There is, and perhaps always will be, a feeling among some that there are still 3 people in the marriage. Camilla's relationship with Charles, however, remains strong. The prince is incredibly happy and contented and amused since Camilla came back into his life, observes a friend. They seem to be very keen on each other, they love each other, and they've come to a contented happiness in their late 60s.